Христос воскресе из мертвых, смертью смерть поправ, и сущим обробег живот даровав. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tomb bestowing life.
Praise Holy Father, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us. Amen.
Amen.
Somebody left some hot food here.
Me feeding my children. Later.
Oh, you feeding your children later? Good.
Yeah. All right. I think everybody.
Well, we're a little shy, a couple people, but maybe they'll roll in.
It's not going to be our last one, so maybe we'll get. We'll try to get everybody to come back on the last day, but today will be.
This is not the last one?
No,
Last time.
no, because it was the 13th day that we meet. And I looked at the original schedule. We were supposed to end in mid-April, so we're taking our time. We're not in a hurry. Just a second. Okay, so just a quick reminder of what we did last time. We started on the book 11. We looked at two things mainly. What first thing was the essence of being Karamazov, and what does it mean to be Karamazov, and why Dostoevsky thinks that whatever the quality that they share is really important and it's a must quality for anybody trying to be a good Christian. So that's one thing, and then Father John was the closest to what I thought was the essence of being Karamazov, and that was in Dmitri's words, the noble impulses. Impulses of the heart. So that's the essence of being Karamazov, as opposed to rational calculations, right? And we talked about Plato and how Plato thought that the human soul has three parts, and that there is this third part. I forgot the Greek word. Timos or Timos. Timos, yes, Timos. That's the third part, which is, well, in the Republic is represented by the army, and it's no incident that Dmitri is a military in the book. So the army, depending on the situation, can support either the good guys or the bad guys. So but you have to have this impulse, this Timos part, that you base your action not just on the rational calculations, because as we will see today, and Ivan is the main example of that, it will most likely lead you into trouble and do the bad deeds, not the good deeds. So you need that impulse to keep on the path of Christian life and express it through actions, not through contemplation. And another thing that we started last time was the suffering. Yeah, two kinds of suffering that there are in the books. That there is a good or beneficial kind of suffering. That's the suffering that the Dmitri is going through, and then there is a bad kind of suffering. And we will see today. In this chapter, there are a lot of references to the last day of Jesus, of Jesus, our Lord Jesus Christ, at the crucifixion on the cross, and especially. Am I doing it? the right
Yeah,
way?
that's the right way.
Да, справа налево.
So, you know, it's in Orthodox cross, you have this extra line that is going from, you know, up,
The
down.
good thief on the right.
Yes, so exactly. Not many. Good thing that we have a Father John here, but not many people actually know what it represents, and that's exactly showing us the path that, you know, in this life we can either try and go to paradise with the good thief, which was on the right of the of Christ at the crucifixion, or we can go the path of the bad thief and go the wrong way. And that's exactly what we will see today with these two brothers, with Ivan and Dmitri, that one chose the right suffering and he is on the path to redemption, and then Ivan will suffer out of pride and he will, you know, sort of follow Dante all the way to the underground where he meets the embodiment of the devil. Well, in his mind. Well, it's a little devil. Like Rakitin is actually actually a good example in this chapter of why rational calculations are bad, and Dmitry will talk about it. But now that we started, I just want to go through the chapters in this book, sort of trying to mention what we see there. And in the beginning, we there is in chapter 3 there is a story with Liz, who is, I would say, losing her mind. But there she's our first example of the wrong kind of suffering, the destructive suffering, and not by incident. She actually contracted it from Ivan. That's Ivan's influence on Liz, and we'll see again many examples of this angel or demonic influence on people. So in this case, you know, Ivan has a bad influence on Liz, and then this is Alexei, who has to save her, and that's why the chapter about Liz is called the little devil, because the devil is still kind of small enough so, you know, Alexei should be able to crush it, whereas the chapter when Ivan meets, you know, his imaginary devil, I forgot the exact title, but I think it's like a big devil. Yeah, the devil. So yeah, the Liz has a little demon, and Ivan has the devil. But unlike Ivan, as we will see later, Liz, and this is why she's a double of Alexei, that's why they have to get married. And you know, I mentioned a number of times that the types of personalities are represented both by male and female. So Liz is a double of Alexei. She recognizes that this darkness, these crazy bad thoughts that she has, is not coming from outside, but that's, you know, the darkness is an essential part of her, and but it's just unlike Alexei, she doesn't know yet how to reconcile those two parts inside herself. And then one thing, it's a kind of historical, what I wanted to mention. There was she mentions this incident where, like, there is this little boy that is being tortured by the Jews, and she is enjoying it and eating compote. Well, actually, it's a real case. I'll try to bring the copy of the like a reprint of the newspaper in the Georgian provinces. They were that's basically when it started at the end of the 19th century. you know, like these rumors that spread. I think in LA we had a few those stories where like preschool teachers were being accused of something, you know, like inappropriate behavior with kids, and then the whole class would confirm, yes, you know, we've been whatever harassed or something bad happened to us, but then, you know, at the end of the day they find out that nothing really happened, but it was like more of a mob trying to
We call it group psychosis.
yeah, group psychosis, sort of mob was going after them. At that time in Georgia, there were a lot of like Georgians and Jews living in the same villages, mixed, and it was a real case where one little girl was missing for a few days, was found dead, as the prosecutors and detectives later found out that, you know, it was by natural causes. She fell off the cliff, and then, you know, the animals kind of didn't help. But before that, the whole village started to say, oh no, you know, it's those Jews living next door, they did those bad things, and the whole riot started. And it was at Dostoevsky's time, it was widely publicized in the papers, and people were saying, yeah, they drink the blood of innocent babies, you know, crazy things like that.
So from a book that was published called Protocols of Zion.
Well,
which
that's
is a total fabrication.
yeah, that's a real crazy thing. Well, anyway, basically what I'm saying is that he doesn't really, like, even if you read this and you think, wow, what a crazy thing, you know, how did he come up with that? But I just mention it to say that he is taking these things from, like, you know, newspapers, the real things happening at the time that he was living. So he didn't invent much in terms of actual, you know, events happening. And then then we see another woman. Now that we looked at Liz, Katerina, and if you remember, she's the double of Ivan. So unlike Liz, she doesn't recognize that she has a dark side. She's all about being noble and prideful and above it all, and being the self-righteous, and that's why she's suffering too, but she's suffering in the wrong way, and out of her pride she will end up not only hurting, you know, people around her, but her own mental health. I should be reading a little bit. So about what I was just talking about, from chapter 3 on page 583. This is Liz talking there at the top of the page. They love it that he killed his father. They love it. They all love it. Everyone says it's terrible, but secretly they all love it terribly. I'm the first to love it. And Alexis says there is some truth in what you say about everyone. So here the two of them recognize that every human has a dark side to them, and, you know, whatever you see on the surface may not match to how we feel inside. And then, you know, she confesses that she sent a letter to Ivan, basically inviting him to seduce her, and, you know, this is the influence that he has on her. And then the next chapter 4, later on page 600, about Katerina, and, you know, they talk about Katerina, and he says, yes, she is suffering, and she's suffering about whether to be Dmitri's savior or his destroyer, because, you know, she's holding, as she thinks, the ultimate proof that he is guilty. So first of all, she is sure that he is guilty. She thinks that she has a proof that he is guilty, but she thinks of herself and being so noble that maybe I will hold that proof and save him life. Okay, I think that's enough about women for now. So similarly to her, Ivan is going to to take the blame. Well, in the beginning of the book, he's going to take the blame for his father's death out of pride and vanity. Meanwhile, he is denying that he himself has the dark side, and he refuses to admit that, he is actually, implicated. He is the one to blame for how the events unfolded, and that's what Smerdikov will be so stunned about, that it seems so clear that Ivan gave him the sign and did everything that needed to be done in order for his father to be killed. But that's the thing. From the very first time we talked about Ivan, we said that as far as his essence, he thinks he's only the good part. He's only noble and good. So that's why this demon is gonna come, because he cannot admit that all these bad things are part of himself. That's why he needs to sort of externalize all of that into like a separate figure and say, well, it's not me that is, if anything bad has been done, it's not me, it's this devil, who comes and influences me.
So, but Alexei tells him, you did not kill our father.
Mm-hmm.
But of course Smerdikov says, no, you did. So he's caught between this kind of rock and hard place.
Well, Alexei is trying to save him because, he knows that this thought...
He says God told me to
tell him. This thought is going to drive him mad, and who knows. Well, remember, both Dmitri and Ivan are also toying with this thought of suicide. And of course, Dmitri is now being cured from it. He is on the good path. He is being reborn. But Ivan is going deeper underground. So I think that's the reason for him to say that, because he was afraid that that's what will end up happening. Yeah, exactly. So.
Because his response is a little bit like Judas.
Wait, so Alexei exonerates him because he's afraid he'll go more insane?
He's afraid that he will kill himself? He's not exonerating him, but he's just saying, well, Alexei is this, he's got infected by this Christian love from Zosima, so he's the last person standing who has this unconditional love. So he's not blaming anyone, and especially with Ivan, he's saying, of course he knows that physically he did not do it, but he sees that his brother is going mad and he's having all these thoughts, and presumably he already knows that he's gonna go tomorrow at the trial. And the trial, by the way, the trial itself is the day of the crucifixion, and that's where everything will sort of finally unfold. And so that's why he's trying to save him from the only thing from which there is no comeback, killing himself. Everything else, as we see in the case of Dmitri, while you're still alive, once you really reach the bottom, that's the point from where you can then be resurrected. And Ivan is definitely not there yet, because
a good example is St. Paul.
Mm-hmm.
He persecuted the Christians.
So now let's look at this scene. I'm gonna skip for now all his conversations with Smerdikov, where you actually find out how the murder really happened and why and how Ivan is implicated. But once he leaves after his third visit with Smerdikov, actually before he goes to visit him for the first time, it's on page 621, he meets this drunken peasant. It's chapter 8, and it's at the top of the page. This drunken peasant is singing a song. Vanka gone to Petersburg, and I will not wait for him. Again, notice, I just erased it, the contrast between the title of the book, the full name, Ivan Fyodorovich, and Vanka is this belittling version of Ivan's name. And this is the only place where that anything other than Ivan is being used. So basically what we see is that this drunken peasant actually knows the truth and sees through that Ivan, by leaving to Moscow, he's basically started the chain of events that ended up in his father being dead. So of course he gets mad at that, unconsciously shoves the peasant, and he is there in the snow. And of course, if you lived in those areas which get freezing temperatures and snow in the winter, I mean I knew few cases throughout my life of people, if they've been drinking and sort of fall asleep outside, they don't wake up because they freeze to death. And that's basically the fate that is the fate of this peasant. If nothing else happens, if this is all that he did, left him there, he would be dead next morning. Which is, I think, also is kind of in parallel with Dmitry hitting his servant Grigory on the night of the murder. And remember, he stopped and tried to clean the blood and trying to check whether or not he is alive. In this case, Ivan just shoves him and goes to visit Smerdikov. So that's the first thing that happens. Then, of course, he has this last conversation, and we talked about how he refuses to understand because he does not accept the dark side as being part of himself. And that's why he's going to confess, not because he understands that he's responsible, but because he's prideful and vain. And interestingly enough, Smerdikov says that Ivan is resembles the most their father. So out of Ivan, Dmitry, and Alexei, Ivan is the closest to the father of the family. And again, as going back to the first or second meeting, all four of them represent four different kind of personalities. I will talk more about them at the last meeting, but in terms of who they are, the four possible types of human personalities, they are all different, but yet Smerdikov says that Ivan is most close to their father. Any thoughts on that? Why Ivan resembles the most their father? Remember, their father is
he's detached. No, Fyodor was not detached, but he really doesn't love people that around him. He's someplace everything has to be right, but in the people that are around him, he doesn't have any love for them. Absolutely not.
Well, yeah, that's a good trait. Neither of them has any love for people around. Just to remind you, the father of the family, his type of the human self is the one that is trying to distract himself from having to face these two parts, two sides inside himself. So he is always trying to be busy and amused and entertained, so that he doesn't have to face it, doesn't have to think about it. And Ivan is in a sense similar too, because he's saying, I'm only the good part.
Yeah.
He is not, he doesn't want to face the fact that he has both good and bad, dark and light inside himself. So he's not really amusing himself, but he's using all this rationality, all this logic and reason and philosophy and everything, trying to convince himself that, you know, as far as him being a human being, he's only the good one. So now we can look at what happened after he left, which is on page 633 and 634. It's right at the end of chapter 8, before the nightmare begins. And I will read. So he goes out, he stumbles upon this peasant, right, that he left there to die. And what happens? The blizzard was still going on. He walked briskly to the first few steps, but suddenly began staggering, as it were. It's something physical, he thought, and grinned. It was as if a sort of joy now descended into his soul. He felt an infinite firmness in himself. The end to his hesitation, which had tormented him so terribly all through those last days. The decision was taken, and now will not be changed, he thought with happiness. Again, going back to this contrast between what it means to be Karamazov, the impulse, versus reason. This is, it says here, it is something physical. So for the first and the only time in his life, by saving this peasant, you know, going to the neighbors and bringing him to the police station, he did something physical. So for the first and the only time in his life, he actually acted on this essential part of being Karamazov, the one that he's consciously tried to avoid throughout his life. So he saves this peasant, and he decides to go not to the court where he would, you know, do this public performance, you know, of saving his brother and taking the blame, but going that night to the prosecutor and, you know, confessing to the authorities and, you know, giving the statement and explaining everything. And that's why, you know, once he got his impulse, he acted on it. He did the only good thing he did throughout the book is saving the life of this drunken peasant. And then just a few hours later, next thing happens. Let me see. And what happens is that his rational part, his reason, is taking back over, you know, over his self. And this is, can I ask Father John?
Yeah.
It's right on 634 at the end of chapter 8, from here to 3.
Okay. If my decision for tomorrow had not been taken so firmly, he suddenly thought with delight, I would not have stayed for a whole hour arranging things for the little peasant. I would simply have passed him by and not cared a damn whether he froze. I'm quite capable of observing myself incidentally, he thought at the same moment, with even greater delight, and they all decided I was losing my mind as he reached his house. He stopped all at once under a sudden question. And shouldn't I go to the prosecutor right now at once and tell him everything? He resolved the question by turning toward his house again. Tomorrow everything together. he whispered to himself, and strangely almost all his joy, all his self-content vanished in a moment, and as he entered his room, something icy suddenly touched his heart.
Yeah. So what happens here is that, from acting on an impulse and something physical, he starts to observing himself and, reasoning and thinking, and as soon as that starts, he's back to his usual mode, and he starts to rationalize, why go today, we'll go tomorrow, and immediately he can feel that's it. He lost his chance, he lost his moment, and he's back on the old path, and it only goes one direction. And interestingly enough, he gets the brain fever. Well, it says on the first lines of the next chapter 9. Remember anybody else who has a brain fever in the book? Dmitri?
Dmitri has.
No, I'm asking.
No, but
Dmitri.
Dmitri was
We'll get to that. He has actually.
brain
He's gonna
fever.
make sure that we understand. He doesn't.
What was the question?
Who else in the book other than Ivan had a brain fever and died from it actually?
One of the mothers?
No, it was Zosima's brother Markel.
Oh.
Remember why he had it, and he represented our Lord Jesus Christ in the novel, this incarnation of God's love all of a sudden. So it's so crazy to the world that everybody thinks he has a brain fever. And here, the guy who will go to the lowest depth of hell has the brain fever too, but the different kind, like the two different kinds of suffering. same thing here. There are like two different kinds of brain fever. It's either you're having this brain fever with God, out of God's love, or out of being with the devil. Just interesting remark, I thought.
But Dmitri, he was.
I will get to that. He will tell you that don't think I'm crazy. I'm really. He's making sure that. And you remember Markel, because this early Christianity seemed so crazy and unthinkable to once it appeared on the face on the earth. Well, that's the story in the book, that people then had to take it to monasteries and write books and think about it to make sense, to make it accessible to us, so us everyday people could understand what is Christianity instead of looking at it as a brain fever. So Dmitri is in our modern world, so he's he can do it in a sort of healthy way, go down to the coal mines and sing songs and praise God and be mentally and physically healthy. At least to the at least to the outside observer. All right. So again, this is why the essence of Karamazov is this, and this is why we will be praising them with Dostoevsky on the last paragraphs and lines in the book, because what he thinks that the good deeds can only be done out of sort of this good impulse, and the agape love feeds on this. And as soon as you turn on your logic and reason, you are on the wrong path, and it's not like no good deeds can be done in that state, but you are on a very shaky ground, and you can justify a lot of things with that's a different story. Okay. So Ivan lost his chance for active love, and he meets his devil. Again, it's not like the devil. It's a product of his imagination. But again, he conforms to the Dante's depiction, because people often confuse. There are some lines in the Bible that talk about fire and in hell, but in Dante and at least and in Dostoevsky, the deeper down you go, the colder it gets. So this is why he's really he feels this chill, when he enters his room, and he gets really, really cold throughout this conversation. And same thing in Divine Comedy, as he was, descending deeper, the cold. So the I guess the imagery or whatever they're trying to show is that it's the opposite of the God's fire and love. That love is actually something that is hot and warm, and the opposite of it is cold and indifference, I would imagine. And I already mentioned that since he doesn't think that the bad part is part of himself, he externalizes this gentleman. And I think on page 637, and throughout this conversation he will be torn in between saying, you are really me, sort of accepting that yes, this is part of me, all these bad things are part of me, but then saying, no, he's not. He's really there. There's really a demon outside of me who is making me do those things. So on the 637, Ivan says, you are a lie, you are my illness, you are a ghost, only I don't know how to destroy you, and I'll have to suffer through it for a while. So again, this is the bad kind of suffering. You are my hallucination, you are the embodiment of myself, but of just one side of me. So this is like exactly what it is. This is the embodiment of his dark side, of my thoughts and feelings, but only the most loathsome and stupid of them. If only he could sort of stay with that and understand that it's not the external embodiment, but this is part of himself, and he has to deal with it. And again, how do we deal with demons?
We suppress them.
We pray, right? And we ask for God's help. And who is fighting demons? Again, this is throughout the book. The angel has to come and save him, right? Ivan. So, and he literally says that when Alexei comes in, knocking on his door, what does he call him? A cherubim. And he's, maybe you're not just the cherubim, maybe you're even seraphim. So immediately, so that, Dostoevsky doesn't let you miss those things, he's kind of pointing you right to it. He's saying the angel came and was able to cast the demon away and cleared his mind, if only for the moment. It's on pages, it's now we're in chapter 10, on pages 651. This is what Ivan says. He got frightened of you, dove, you are pure cherub, just like I told you. So the angel comes to chase the demon out, and this is what he says. You have chased him away, he says to Alexei. It's on 652 at the bottom. And he is me, Alyosha, me myself. All that's low, all that's mean and contemptible in me. Alyosha, Ivan added terribly seriously and as if confidentially, I would much prefer that he were really he and not I. So he still hasn't figured it out whether it's, the devil that he saw is, part of himself, or it's, something that is really outside of him. And he says that he would really prefer that it was, something external. that would be his wish, because again, who he is as a person, his essence is to be, just this pure, noble and rational part with no sort of no dirt attached, so to speak. Okay, almost done for today. And again, let me see. Okay, so he's now going. He had a chance, like with with the impulse, he had a chance to sort of do the good deed and go to the prosecutor, but he missed it once he started thinking, and the same thing happens when the angel comes to save him. He sort of realizes that the devil is the part of himself, but then again he starts to think about it and says, well, I really would want him to be something from outside, and now he's going to the court, still in and meanwhile he keeps on coming down and down, so he's going to the court out of, again, pride and self-love, and will suffer the suffering that will destroy him. And now if we go to 684, it's actually in the in the book 12, but I wanted to show it to you today. It's the chapter 5 there. It says a sudden catastrophe. And so what we will now witness is the perverted suffering of Christ on the cross, not the good suffering, but this devilish suffering that leads to destruction. So Ivan Fedorovich somehow approached remarkably slowly. So he is coming to the stand, to the witness stand, on 684. Ivan Fedorovich somehow approached remarkably slowly, not looking at anyone, and even with his head bowed, as though gloomily pondering something. He was dressed impeccably, as he always is, but his face produced a morbid impression, at least on me. There was in his face something, as it were, touched with clay, something resembling the face of a dying man. His eyes were dull. He raised them and looked slowly around the courtroom. So here we have this dying person, already being on the cross. 2 pages later, on 686, next thing happens. His last words. I'm a good one. Again, right? So he says that, whatever, he takes the blame for his father's death, but then he says, I'm a good one. Is there some water? Give me a drink for Christ's sake. He suddenly clutched his head. So it's not by accident that he invokes Christ's name, because the last thing that Christ did what happened at the crucifixion, when they were offering this water and vinegar, and so he's like, he finished with his testimony. He's about to go bonkers, for good, and so he sort of mocks, in a bad way, the events at the crucifixion. He's asking for water for Christ's sake, and he ends up by barking like a dog at everybody around him and hating everyone and really going mad. Okay, so this is now we can compare Ivan's perverted suffering to the suffering that actually heals, the good kind of suffering, and that's the case with Dmitri. And now we'll have to go back a little bit. It's on page 596 when Alexei goes to visit him. 596, back in the book 11. Yes. So this is Dmitry talking about what's going to happen at the trial, and you remember Ivan is trying to tell him, let's run away. And where do they want to run away? To America.
America, да.
Yes. And so this is what he says. I'll be running away from suffering. I was shown a path, and I rejected the path. There was a way of purification. Ivan says that a man with good inclination can be of more use in America than under the ground. Forget America. America means vanity again. To run away from crucifixion, I'm talking to you, Alexei, because you alone can understand this and no one else. For the others, it's foolishness, raving, all that I was telling you about the hymn. They will say, he's lost his mind, or else he's a fool. But I haven't lost my mind, and I'm not a fool either. So this is going back to your suggestion that Dmitry also has a brain fever. He actually says, I'm not a madman and I'm not a fool.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want to run away from crucifixion, unlike Ivan. He's seeing that there is a path for himself, and he is trying to, embrace it as firmly as he can, because he came to realization that this is the only way for him, to bring together his wide personality and try to save himself.
Well, he has to sell all that he has. I mean, in other words, he goes through this. Can a man be married and go to? You can't get married. I mean, he has to just be willing to get rid of all of it, and that's the.
Well, he is pretty much out of everything at this stage.
Yeah, but the
Yes.
idea is if you want to really repent and suffer, you have to go.
Yeah, you cannot go to
You cannot do
You
it
can't
here.
go to the Vatican place, right? Yeah.
You really have
Well,
to go
actually,
to
you're
Russia, and
absolutely
then
right.
you then you will
One thing
repent.
for sure, you will.
Yeah, and so that we don't miss
Then
it,
you
at the
suffer.
bottom of 596, he says to his last words to Alexei, embrace me quickly, kiss me, cross me, darling, cross me, for tomorrow is the cross. So he realizes, not out of craziness like Ivan, but he is realizing in the sound mind, as he said, that tomorrow he wants to suffer, even though he knows that he is innocent. He understands that the suffering is necessary for him to be cured and being reborn and being on the right path.
But he committed grave sin. By hating his father, might as well could have killed him.
Yeah, I think last time or the time before we talked about that. Again, this is a very Christian idea, and Dmitry understands it, that even though he did not physically do it, he is the same, nonetheless same at fault for hating his father and wishing for his father's death. It's like in the Bible when Jesus says, you better rip off your eye, if you sin with your eye and in your mind, even though that you actually didn't do anything, it's equally as bad. And whereas in pagan times, in the times of laws and jurisdiction, it's all about the action. If you did the bad thing, no matter what was in your mind, you have to be panicked. You have to. You suffer punishment, but as long as you restrain yourself, you can think whatever you want. That's more like a pagan attitude. So this idea, he really hammers down this idea. What time is it now? Is it 8 already?
7:54.
Okay, so just to close. If anybody who wants an exercise or think about, remember, this book is all about giving us the existential meaning of the sacraments that we have in the church, of all these biblical passages that we read, of different church traditions. So what we should do on the last day, I'll bring my own, but you can do this on your own too, is make a list of all those things that Dostoevsky gives us in existential meaning. Like, for example, baptism, with those Alexei being held under the slanting rays of sun by his mother at the icon of Theotokos, right? So we have baptism, we have all this explanation of what hell and paradise are and how they're accessible to us here. What we talked about today, the last, the day of the crucifixion, what it means to be the good thief and the bad thief, and what it is to carry the cross. And this book is, as I tried to show you, is full of those things that give us everyday meaning to abstract things and ideas that we encounter as Christians. The resurrection, all it's going to be, it's going to be. I will not. There are a lot of them actually on the last pages in the epilogue as well. But just so this is the idea of what one of the things we'll be doing next time is that we'll look at our list and we'll try to remember where and how he gave us meaning to all those different things from our life as a Christian. And on the other hand, again, on the first day I said we listed all those scientific discoveries of his time and how significantly the world around him was changing and how it was seen as an assault, as a threat to religion in general and Christianity. In this book, I told you that the nerve cells were only discovered 4 years before this book was being published, and already Rakitin comes in and he needs to sway Dmitri from the good path, and he's talking about that there is no God, there is no us, there are just these nerve cells, these tails. Well, the microscopes weren't that good, so all they could see that it's actually special kind of cells, different from all the other ones. And he was talking about these tails that wiggle, and that's it. Where's the human soul in those?
Well, I was interested. We didn't talk about it's in what we read today, but we didn't talk about it. But it was interesting to hear Ivan and Smerdyakov talk the third time, in particular, second or third time, I can't remember, but how basically, I think it was the third time, and where he's literally saying, well, of course, you're the reason why I did it, but what I really predicted was that Dmitri would do this, this, and this. And what I was thinking there is that how God intervened on behalf of Dmitri, so he didn't do that. And in a certain way, spiritually, that's kind of what happens sometimes, that even the worst intent of the evil one against us, still God.
Well, he even said it himself. I forgot, I think in the book 10, he said, when he's describing how he was waiting by the window and his father opened it and he saw his face and he hated so much, and he literally says, it's only by God's grace, I was able to restrain myself and run away. And, because, he was like right there almost, on the verge of doing it. Yeah, and he actually says that it's only by God's grace. God's visited me at that moment and, saved me from doing it.
And that is actually one of the great messages about Christianity. St. Theophan the Recluse, actually. Same time.
And but again, and this is the thing, in all those instances where he was relying on himself to restrain him, it always went south. So this is the main lesson for him to learn through all of this, because he knows he has a bad and good, and throughout his life he tried to bring them together himself, and that's why he has to go to prison and through trial to realize that he is not able and he needs to rely on God for those things.
Amen.
Control.
Amen.
Anything else before we end? I think that's
Before we end, This is from all of us.
I mean, I want to say like thank you for you know all my faithful and people who even came once. I'm kind of like despairing sometimes that I'm not clear enough, or what I'm saying does not make sense. Does not make sense. But I try to put effort into this and try to find something that you wouldn't thought otherwise, or you wouldn't find yourself, or if you didn't spend if you didn't read it like 10 times as some people do read it even more, but I'm trying to show you no matter how many times you read it, you'll still find new things, and it's really, at least for me, was the book that sort of swayed the pendulum in terms of Christianity, and
I would like to, on behalf of everyone, thank you. It was amazing
Well,
experience.
thanks
We're
for
not
that.
done yet.
Not in a million years I would think the meaning of this book. I read the book before, but meaning completely escaped me.
But again, with your input too, important. Actually, after lectures, I go back and I make like little notes about things I haven't noticed before.
Do you do lectures on other books?
Not not yet.
Not
No,
yet.
no. I mean, with this,
What about idiot?
maybe that's a good thing maybe for next year, because it's actually about the nature of Christ. Could it be just the name wouldn't suggest it, but the idiot is about could Christ be just God and still save us, or he had to be fully man and fully God, and why it's it's essential that he is both for us to be saved.
So in anticipation of that, a year from now or a year from February, start reading The Idiot. If you haven't read it.
So that might be a good idea.
Yeah, that sounds good actually.
Thank you very much again, and I hope to see you all next
last.
Wednesday for our final, and I'll try to surprise myself. like you surprised me today. Thank you.
Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and among us in the tombs bestowing life. Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. Christos воскресе из мертвых, смертью смерть поправ, Иисущим во гробе живот даровал. Christ is risen.
In truth is
Christos
risen.
anesti.
Христос
Christos
анести.
воскресе.
Воистину воскресе!
We still got a long way to go.